Welcome to Influence Interviews, where my mission is to introduce you to people who will have a positive impact on your practice because of their expertise, their experience, and their example of great leadership. Today, my guest is Tim Twigg. He is the president of Bent Ericksen Associates. This is a family-owned business that for over 30 years, they've helped thousands of small businesses achieve confidence in their employment compliance and human resources. They provide the tools to make HR simple, compliant, and worry-free. HR is not an add-on service. It's the only service they do, and they do it expertly. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks so much, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I have had I've been fortunate enough to talk to more than just you and your organization, and I'm excited about one of the things that I do, of course, is leadership and team culture and compliance and things like that, but I don't really get into the HR side of things. And so I'm really excited to have you share your expertise on what you're seeing in dental practices and where their biggest challenges lie.
Great. I'm looking forward to being part of this.
Terrific. Well, as I have said, you have 35 years of practice management and business consulting experience. And I understand that leadership is a huge part of the gift, basically, that you give to businesses that you work with in their development and strategic planning. How did you get into the HR side and to really focus there?
Well, the simple answer is, how can you go into an office or any business, work with them on either a coaching or a consulting, from that perspective, and not get into the people component? I mean, when it's all said and done, businesses are comprised of the people. The systems are only as good as the people running them. And fundamentally, as you well know, leadership is absolutely foundational, and communication is absolutely foundational. And so just over the years, as the work continued to emphasize the people aspect and the human aspect, it just became more and more of what we, I guess, narrowed our niche to a point that it was like, okay, yes, I understand there's processes, I understand there's systems, I understand these other elements are also necessary, but fundamentally and foundationally, it's all about people, it's the humans, and how do we make this whole thing work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you have kind of combined this compliance piece with that, because a lot of times you just deal with, like you said, the processes or the procedures or the must-dos to stay, to stay out of trouble and to prevent risk, right? But it all does come with that communication piece. Do you assist in the hiring process, or do you kind of get in there after the fact? Where do you get started when you connect with a practice?
Well, the short answer to your question is yes and yes, but let me kind of grow that just a little bit. When it comes to HR, of course, HR has two sides. There's like the fun side of HR, and then there's the not so fun side. And the not so fun side is that piece you were alluding to, the compliance piece, the place where there's risk and there's liability. And that's the side that sort of gives HR its a bad rap, or it's the part of, ooh, HR, it's scary and I don't like it. But there is absolutely also a really fun side to HR. Now, when we look at it, we see HR as having 5 principal components. There is a leadership component, which you absolutely know. There is an organizational culture element of HR, which again, you are absolutely clued into. Yes, there's an employment compliance piece. That's about crossing the T's and dotting the I's and making sure all the bases are covered from a regulatory standpoint. Mm-hmm. Then there is what you just asked me about. There is recruiting and hiring and onboarding. And then there is employee engagement. Now, the way we look at these 5 components is the first 3, the leadership, the organizational culture, and the employment compliance. These are pretty foundational. I mean, they have got to be there if one really wants to have the type and kind of practice where you got a great reputation as a wonderful place to work. You've got a great reputation as a leader and a boss and an employer. There is a kind of culture that supports people having a sense of belonging and a sense of contribution. And yeah, you got to make sure that the bases are covered from a compliance standpoint. When those foundational pieces, those first three are in place, then you can really start looking at more the tactical side of HR, and that's recruiting and hiring and onboarding, and then employee engagement. But from our perspective, you can't just do one, or you can't just do two, because they're almost like interwoven into each other. And so to your question specifically, some people may come to us because they're dealing with challenges of turnover, or they're coming with challenges of, I can't find good people. And yes, we'll start to engage with them in that way. Some people, sadly, come to us because I just got a letter from my labor board and they're telling me I'm going to be sued or whatever. Well, our engagement starts there, but we always try to work on making sure that this, if you will, house of HR that has all of these 5 components are ultimately in place and are seamlessly working together, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. And it's the reason you're on this this influence interview today, because I think it's so important to include all of those components, and you guys are doing it beautifully. And, I wonder, so many of the practices that I go into, they try to manage HR themselves. And sometimes they're small practices, so they don't really think about what that looks like. And often it's the dentist doing that. He's managing the HR, and of course he's managing all of the components, and he has a couple of people. In some of these small practices, growth is so, what you do is just required first for that growth that they're looking for. How often do you find that dentists want to grow, but they are missing this piece? When do they contact you? How do you find them?
Well, obviously, people come to learn about us lots of different ways. We have a regular column in Dental Economics. We also write for Dental Doctor Bicuspid. We're in Dentistry IQ. We do a lot of presenting, whether it's in webinars or virtual courses, as well as presentations at study clubs. And so people become aware of us from a whole lot of these different avenues. Now, one of the things, Laura, that you touched on was this idea of the dentist who is attempting to do this him or herself. And if we dial back for just a moment, but we have to remember that virtually nowhere in their dental education, in the curriculum at dental school, is there anything on business or management, much less anything on human resources and employment compliance. And so then they come out, and here's this whole aspect of owning and running a business and having employees, and not to put this in a disparaging light, but it's like they're clueless. I mean, they just don't know, understandably so, about some of these things. Now, this is also complicated because there's a whole lot of myths that are out there. And one myth is, well, I'm just a small employer. I only have 5 employees or 7 employees. And so therefore, I really don't have to worry about this stuff. This is only applies to the great big companies and the corporations. Well, it's an absolute myth that as soon as you have, regardless of what state you're in, as soon as you have just one employee, you've got to follow about 95% of all of the rules and the laws that are out there. So you really don't get off the hook, so to speak, from being a small employer. But there is this myth that is out there. There's also some assumptions that, well, I'm okay because I haven't gotten that nasty letter from the labor board yet. And so the kind of ignorance is bliss sort of stuff. But it is also at the same time kind of scary. Currently, in the healthcare industry, in our industry with dentists, the average out-of-court settlement for a labor-related issue is $40,000.
Wow.
That's just to have it go away.
Right.
You know, and it would cost more to try to fight it, and talking about whether you win or lose, and so on. So it is something where, and here, if we're talking to dentists, it's kind of like preaching to the choir, that this is really a prevention kind of thing. It's what can we be doing now that will prevent these kinds of issues from a risk and liability standpoint, and in so doing, support that kind of foundation we were talking about a better, a happier, a more harmonious work environment with longer term retention of quality people, and therefore less turnover, and the financial and emotional toll that inherently comes with turnover.
I love that. And you talk about that culture and the retention, and being prepared for what may come. There's not just the expense of being sued, the expense of rehires, like if you don't get the right person. I mean, the expense of even a small team, if you have retention, which I know they're all struggling with retention these days. So can you kind of go into a little bit more about how you get them to success through others, right? Because that's one of the things that I coach to, is once you get those right people on board and you have this great culture, and how can you elevate your practice through your people? And I think they're missing a big piece of that, as they have, whether it be benefits, whether it be incentive programs, whether it be bonuses and training, all these little pieces that really, all of their success comes through their people, like you mentioned. What are some of the things that you recommend, or just to kind of get that path of advancement for their team?
God,
that's question, a big one, I know.
Oh man, we could unpack this one for an hour and work with it, but that's great. And I'll try to tease it apart a little bit. So first of all, and now we'll circle back to one element of leadership. It becomes an issue of how does the leader view his or her people? And there are some of them that view them as an expense, that they're a necessary evil. I wish I could do all this without them, but I guess I got to have some, but that they're just a necessary evil. And so the management approach there is more about control and dictating. Now, there is the flip side of that is to view people truly as a resource. And I can't do it without them. And so in that way, I'm going to involve them. I'm going to engage them in a way that we now are starting to form this idea of a team, where each person brings their respective areas of expertise and strengths, and we start to amalgamate that from a team standpoint. Organizational culture, I think the biggest differentiator there is this idea of thinking or not thinking. See, some organizational cultures are built on don't think. And of course, our greatest example of that is our military. In the military, you're not supposed to think. You don't ask questions. You just do as you're told and all that. That's the military's culture. And then the complete flip side of that is an organizational culture that is more about openness and transparency and information. And in fact, people are encouraged to ask questions or bring up thoughts and ideas. Any business owner can make a decision. It's like, well, what is my organizational culture going to be? One where people are encouraged to think, or one where they're just going to do whatever I tell them to do, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, the little differentiation that I make there is that a dental practice ultimately is a customer service business. Now, the service happens to be providing dentistry, but it's really a customer service business. And in a customer service business, all throughout the day, there are instances and situations that come up that require a decision to be made. Mr. Jones is asking if we can make 3 payments instead of 2 payments on this procedure that we're doing. Or so-and-so can only come in the afternoon, even though we really only want to do this type of procedure in the morning. You know, the myriad questions that come up all the time. Well, are you a business owner that want to be hit with those kinds of questions like all day long? No, it probably drive you nuts. And so you want to empower your people to think and to answer those questions within the context of the practice's vision and mission and purpose. So in that way, now people start to have greater purpose for being there than just the idea of a paycheck. Now, to your thing, yeah, it's important that you pay well. It's important that you have benefits, because obviously salary and benefits are very important to people. We are big advocates and believers in bonus and incentive plans as a way of building almost like psychic ownership on the part of the people who work there, that if I'm here and if we all work together and accomplish more, then there's something in this for me. It's not arbitrary. It's not discretionary. We are all in this to win. Well, now all of a sudden, when I wake up in the morning and I'm going to go to work, again, I have a higher purpose in coming here. And it's about making a difference in the lives of the people who we serve, and certainly the engagement with respect to my fellow employees. So I don't know if I got off on a little too much tangent-y stuff with your question, but that was...
You came full circle, and it was beautiful and perfect, because I think all of those bits and pieces, they all come together beautifully to create a culture and an environment where people want to come to work, and they're not just watching the clock and waiting for it to end, and they're on this, hamster wheel of employment. Totally. So I love all of those parts that you touched on. Tim, you're also an author. Will you tell us a little bit about that? I know you have mentioned the places where you have articles, but you also are a published author as well, correct?
Correct.
And where can we find you?
Oh, well, you can just Google and stuff comes up. I've contributed to a number of different books and articles and magazines. In fact, I was working on an article today, and as you know, for businesses, there's this big focus on your USP, your unique selling proposition. Right. And of course, it's all used in marketing and selling to create your message and communicate what differentiates you from everyone else. Why would someone come and patronize your business versus someone else's? Well, what we've been working on for a while now is for practitioners and employers to start really thinking about, let me get rid of that phone, to start thinking about their UEP, your unique employment proposition. Why would someone come to work for you versus going to work for someone else? Which then gets into issues of, well, my reputation as an employer, my reputation as a place to work. We have, Laura, lots and lots of clients who are not having trouble staffing their practices because they have the reputation as a great place to work. Right. They have resumes where people have come by and say, I don't know if you're hiring yet, but when you are, I am interested in being considered. Well, think about how much pressure that takes off of the practice in this whole idea of trying to have adequate numbers of staff and the type and kind of people. So
it's amazing here. I'm in the state of Washington this week, and the practitioner I met with last week, he is hiring anybody he can. Several of them are past teachers. and people are changing industries, which can be a beautiful place to find people if you have an amazing training program together. But I see what you're saying. What a great problem to have when your staff is attracting other people in the industry to your practice because they know they love working there.
Yeah, completely. I mean, practices spend a whole lot of time, energy, and money on ensuring that they have great Google reviews and Facebook reviews from patients. And what are patients saying? It's like, well, what would the Google review or the Facebook review be of you as an employer if such a thing existed? Do you have the reputation as a great place to work, or as a lousy place to work, or as a just so-so place to work until something better comes along? And all of that circles back to your expertise, because it's all about leadership and the paradigms that you approach this whole aspect of the people side of owning and running a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to hear your opinion on, because this is a struggle that people who own a business, it doesn't matter if it's employees that you bring into your home as a home employer, it doesn't matter where it exists, and that is how to really keep your team engaged and enjoy working with them and build this trusted relationship, but keep it professional so that now you're not, employing your friends.
Yeah, great question. And for me, that circles to this idea of employee engagement. And what are we doing as an organization, or what am I doing as a leader to really engage the employees? Employee engagement has become critical relative to creating what I'm going to refer to as stickiness with respect to employees. And it's stickiness in having people stay, that there is, again, there is a bigger reason and a bigger purpose for working here than just it's a job or just it's a paycheck. And employee engagement is the fundamentals for dealing with that. It's gotten to a point where we are recommending that people have an employee engagement line item in their budget, and that line item is about 1% to 2%. And so if you've got a practice, let's just make the math easy. If the practice is doing $1 million, that means $10,000 to $20,000 is a line item for employee engagement. Now, initially, some people might go, hey, wait a minute, that money's mine. I don't, well, in the face of not doing this, then you have turnover. And you alluded to it just a little bit ago. It's the cost, the financial, and the morale and stress impact of turnover. I will tell you statistically that they say that turnover costs you however much you pay for that position for 1 year.
That's right.
So if this is a $40,000 a year position, or it's a hygiene position and it's $70,000 or $80,000, turnover costs $70,000 to $80,000, $40,000, whatever it is. And the real impact is not from advertising and interviewing or ad placement. The real cost is it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months for a brand new employee to be fully up to speed in the practice. And when you're not operating on all cylinders, there's a little nick to your production. Well, if that little nick is $5,000 a month for 4 months, that's 20 grand. If it's 6 months, then that's 30,000 just right there. And if I don't produce it, I'm clearly not going to be able to collect it, which means it doesn't end up in the bank. And so there's that whole cost with it. Now, the other thing little footnote I want to talk about or say about this employee engagement piece is 1% to 2%, but understand that practices are already doing things. They've just not thought of them more formally as employee engagement. So they maybe do a holiday party each year. Maybe they do a summer outing or some summer event. And they spend $2,000 or $3,000 on that. Maybe they acknowledge people's birthdays. They acknowledge people's work anniversaries. And so they do some things already. So it's not as if I'm saying earmark 1% to 2%, it's not like none of that is currently happening. No, there's a chunk of it already happening. This is about bringing it more to the forefront as something we really want to ensure that we're doing on a regular and an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I love that you said regular and ongoing too, because I do think it's important to have a little bit of structure around that, so that that consistency, I think, is important, so that everybody, I guess, gets to participate in it. It's great if you have, one-on-ones with certain positions, or I just think having some structure around that is really, really important. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. I also like the idea of a little spontaneousness to it too. It's like, well, what if a week from now or 2 weeks from now that we have a cancellation at 10 o'clock in the morning, and so we've got a gap in the schedule. What if we dipped into the petty cash and we got out $40 and we walked around the office and we asked everyone what they would like from Starbucks? And everyone said, oh, I want a latte, or I want a this, or I want a that. And someone or two people make a run. They come back with that. And instead of going crazy about this 1 hour of downtime and trying to fill it, what if just now and again, you did that for that hour, and everyone sat around with their thing and we talked about what movies you watched last week and what did you like, or some kind of thing like that. And
I love that, because I love that. That's a great idea that I actually had not thought of before. I guess I'm kind of I have a structure mindset. And so I love that spur of the moment stuff, because that's when the real gold happens around building those relationships, having those trusted things, because they're happening naturally.
correct.
So that's a great tip.
Well, yeah, Laura, what I wanted to add was that you mentioned this idea of practices that are hiring people who don't have dental experience.
Right.
And, certainly that's the nature of the beast right now and part of the challenge. Sometimes people look at that as a distinct negative, like, oh my gosh, I have to go outside dentistry to hire. And I don't necessarily think that it is a negative, because actually for two reasons. First of all, yes, it's really challenging right now, but if we take a page out of some companies like Procter and Gamble, IBM, these companies, they've known forever that to really end up with the type and kind of employees that they need and want, they have to develop these people. They can't just count on our educational system or whatever to just drop people in their lap. Dentistry has had that view for a long time. Well, I'm just going to rely on our educational system and dental assisting schools and hygiene schools, and they're just going to drop people on my lap and I don't have to mess with this. Well, today, I think there is a challenge / opportunity for employers to really think about this from the standpoint of, how do I develop these quality people? And just like you said, some of these people may come from outside of dentistry. They've never worked in dentistry. And the key there is they've got a great attitude. They've got a great attitude, call it vibe, call it fit, or whatever. So sometimes when it comes to recruiting and hiring, one of the little mantras, if you will, that we tell people is you hire for the things that you cannot train. Right? We can't teach attitude. We can't teach fit. We can teach people how to take x-rays. We can teach people how to pour up models. We can teach people how to run the computer and process insurance. We can't teach attitude. And so ultimately, if it means I've got to backfill with some of that other training to really get this person on board, and how to count teeth and what surfaces or which surfaces, we can do all that stuff. And when you do that, you might end up with an employee who has such a degree of loyalty and commitment to you because of the investment you made in them, that it becomes an absolute win-win.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So glad you touched on that. I feel like there's sometimes when you hire for skill over those values, the attitude, things like that, they have some habits you can't, are hard to untrain. Then you have to have an untraining program with your training program.
Big time. I agree.
Terrific. Oh, such a pleasure to be able to speak with you. I literally could do this all day long because I love this stuff so much. I think it's so important. What is the best way? You've mentioned some great ways that they can learn from you in dental economics and dental IQ, dentistry IQ. Love those platforms. What is another way and the best way that they can reach out to your organization?
Oh, just to hit the website, we're bentericksen.com. And the only tricky part is Erickson is spelled with an S-E-N on the end as opposed to an S-O-N. So bentericksen.com. We've got a resource library there with a whole bunch of free and complimentary information for them. They can shoot us emails at info@bentericksen.com. Phone numbers there. So sure, if among the resource library, if someone's wondering about kind of where they're at in the compliance arena specifically, we've got a risk analysis on there that they can just go and take. We've also got a 4-minute little quiz. It's a yes and no question. So it's a nice way to do almost like a little dipstick to go, okay, well, let's just see where we are. You know, if they're thinking they've got their bases covered, here's an opportunity to go, oops, and no, we don't, or yes, we do. And so that's just a nice way of gaining more information and education.
Yeah, I have been stalking your webpage. Actually, it is full of wonderful resources and education. And so, yeah, I recommend it 100% to get over there, bentericksen.com. And thank you so much, Tim, for meeting with me today. I really appreciate it. I look forward to being able to connect again soon.
Good. I look forward to it also. And thank you again for the opportunity.
You bet.